Welcome everyone to our session at the Global Evaluation Week, powered by the Global Evaluation Initiative. I'm Amy Bosworth.
And I'm Amy Murgatroyd.
We are the founders of the Know Better Exchange. Today we will be doing a collaborative session with you, exploring our individual roles in enabling a transformative approach to evaluation. In this session, we will be touching on Made in Africa evaluation theory from other Amy's master's research, but the aim is really not to focus too much on the theories and concepts, but rather guide you through a reflective and active hour. For now, it would be great if you could take a moment to introduce yourself in our chat. You can just pop your name and the place that you are joining us from today. While you're doing that, we'll give you some background to who we are. The Know Better Exchange is an organization providing impact measurement and capacity building for evaluation services. Our work is largely focused on supporting the nonprofit and corporate sector. We have experience working with projects and organizations within food systems, education and youth development, entrepreneurship, and sustainability spaces. Our logo includes these hands, and we love them because they represent our commitment to relationship building with our clients and facilitation of knowledge exchanges, learning, and co-creation processes.
Okay, so a little bit about me. I was born in Zimbabwe, and soon after I was born, Nelson Mandela was elected as president of South Africa. And so my parents saw a new opportunity and a new start for the country. And so they packed up their little family and we moved to the place that I now very much call home. On a professional level, I am in the process of writing my master's thesis. And alongside this, I've also been doing some work, mostly in program development and management in the NGO sector.
I am South African, and I grew up in the deep south of Cape Town. 8 months ago, I followed my heart to Wellington, New Zealand, where I'm still waiting for working rights. So I'm 10 hours into the future over here. My background is primarily in food systems and change making or innovation. This was really shaped when I completed in 2021 my master's, which was part of a transdisciplinary action research project focusing on experimentation within urban living labs. Since then, I've been lecturing part-time and part-time consulting to organizations in research and evaluation. Both Amy and I have philosophical underpinnings from our postgraduate studies at both the Sustainability Institute as well as the Center for Sustainability Transitions. This, with our own set of unique professional experiences, strongly shapes how we view and interact with the world. As mentioned, our upbringings and work have been focused in the context of South Africa, but we also feel that these learnings and insights are valuable for any context where the impact desired involves complex systems and navigating wicked problems.
All right, so let's get into it. So as a starting point, I thought we could just unpack what we mean by the evaluation ecosystem. So in its most basic form, an ecosystem is a community of interacting organisms, which in this case would be all of us on the Zoom call, and their physical environment, which on a micro scale might be, as I say, the Zoom call, but it could also extend to everything from the local South African evaluation sector all the way to the international development sector at large. So basically the message is we are all part of this evaluation ecosystem. And so today's session is really about considering where we position ourselves within that evaluation ecosystem, and then also exploring what roles we play. And so with this in mind, we'd like to do a quick poll. So in this poll, if you could please select which actor you most relate to within the evaluation system. Obviously, many of you wear many hats, and in that case, you can just pick the role that you'd like to explore a bit deeper today. And also, if you don't feel like you relate to any of these, perhaps put yourself in the shoes of the program participant, and explore the questions from their point of view. Nice. I see we have lots of evaluator consultants in the room, NGO, public sector, private sector employees, a couple of students. We have a donor in the room, internal evaluator. Nice. All right, that's everyone. Okay, so to set the stage for the workshop, I thought I'd just share a story that some of you might be able to relate to. So in 2021, I was leading the development and implementation of a farmer training program in the Cape Flats. And after a year of the program, we had the opportunity to pitch this program to a large American foundation for a very big sum of money. And during the presentation, they were quizzing me, how many farmers will the program employ? How quickly can you scale? How much profit are the farmers going to make? I think essentially what they wanted to know was what their return on investment would be. Now, for the donor in the room, I'm not saying that this isn't a fair inquiry. However, by following this line of thought, I felt that they were missing all of the good stuff. So, for example, the fact that the program was creating safe spaces for women and children. It was increasing nutrition levels in the community. It was really giving farmers a sense of purpose, like a reason to get up in the morning and go to work. And it was also increasing the use of organic practices in the community. And so what I experienced in this particular case was a donor organization who was really prioritizing their own needs, failing to capture the actual impact of the program, and leaving the participants voiceless. And I'd like to just take a moment at this point to go back to the title of the slide. So we wanted to recognize that there are many organizations who are actually doing really well to reposition themselves as thinking partners and let go of these Euro-American frameworks. And so we wanted to highlight that we don't necessarily think this is the context we're operating in, but rather the context that we're moving through. And during this experience, the story that I just shared, this was what led me to my master's inquiry. And so for my master's, the primary thing I was investigating was how success and failure is actually experienced by the people on the ground, the people who the program's for. And also whether there were any evaluation frameworks that we could use that could actually better reflect these experiences. And I think essentially what I was seeking was a more transformative approach to evaluation. So this inquiry led me to this emerging concept, Made in Africa evaluation. And for those of you who aren't familiar with MAE, this framework emerged as an outcome of the 7th biannual AFRIA conference in 2007, where the theme was Make Evaluation Our Own. And so as part of my thesis, I conducted a meta synthesis, and I went back over everything that's been written since this conference on Made in Africa evaluation, and came up with what I found were the 8 guiding principles, which I do hope to publish if Mark is on the call, to help guide our conversation today. So we're going to present Made in Africa evaluation, but only as one potential transformative approach. We would really like to invite you as part of the evaluation ecosystem to also bring into the space your own set of guiding principles and values that shape your practice. Because as we know, these frameworks are only really as useful as their ability to shape and guide actual practice in the field. And then just for clarity, I've defined a principle as the fundamental propositions and importantly, points of action that can be used to guide practitioners, in this case, towards a Made in Africa evaluation approach. So the first principle is about encouraging African thought leadership and ownership within the evaluation space, which in practice means challenging how and by whom evaluation knowledge is constructed and utilized. The second principle is about developing an evaluation practice that's rooted in African worldviews and belief systems. And many of you will know that a commonly cited example for this is the notion of relationality. And during my fieldwork, which was based in rural KwaZulu-Natal, I actually experienced what this means in practice. Because when I asked the program participants, what does success mean to you? Most of them defined it in relation to either their family, their community, or the environment. And I found this to be very different to the often individualistic way that we measure success in Western culture. The third principle is about mainstreaming an evaluation practice that's centered around the needs and priorities of African people. And this links us quite nicely to the fourth principle, which is about enabling the space for participation and co-creation so that we can actually better understand what these needs and priorities are. And in my experience, this requires a lot of buy-in from the evaluation ecosystem, as it requires a lot of time and focus and resources. The fifth principle is about ensuring that all evaluations and programs, for that matter, are responsive to the local context and culture. The sixth principle is about capacity, building capacity amongst African evaluators like us, so that they can lead evaluations rather than just being constrained to the role of the practical fixer or the data collector. The seventh principle, which is core to MAE, is about actively working to restructure power relations among stakeholders. And so this involves disrupting these traditional donor-beneficiary relationships and rather rebuilding relationships that are based on mutual knowledge exchanges. And that's something that No Better Exchange really wants to focus on doing. And lastly, Made in Africa evaluation calls for the documentation of all these methods and values and practices, so that we can ensure that the practice is robust and that it's also useful to other people across the world. So I know this is quite a lot to take in all at once, but you will get a chance to engage with these principles a little bit more in the next part of the session. So for the next part of the session, as we said, we're more interested in sort of facilitating a dialogue where we can draw from all of our collective experiences rather than just droning on through a bunch of frameworks and theories, which often I think just limit our creativity. So what we'd like to do is go into breakout rooms and we're going to discuss the following questions. Firstly, what is your role in the evaluation ecosystem? What can you do to enable a more transformative approach? And what do you need from the ecosystem to enable this? And then what are the constraining factors that you might face? And we're going to go into great breakout rooms according to who you selected in the poll. And so we're also going to post in the chat now, Ames, if you wouldn't mind, the link to the Jamboard. And so we're going to use a collaborative Jamboard, and then on the Jamboard, you'll see for each actor, there's a slide. So depending on your actor, just head over to that slide. And then from there, we can use the sticky notes to record your group's ideas and comments. We've also copied the Made in Africa principles over there. So this can sort of serve as a springboard for your conversations. As there are quite a few, you might want to like hone in on one or two, or just share experiences within your group and see if we can start a bit of a dialogue around these questions. So we are going to send you, because we have the power to just send you into breakout rooms now.
I just wanted to give Guy Rudolph a heads up that you are the only donor, unfortunately, in the room. So we don't want you to be talking to yourself. So I put you into the evaluator consultant role, if that's okay. And I'm sure you can bring some of your donor experience also into the conversation because it's quite a small room. Okay, I'm going to open
but a very important person to have in the room.
Okay, so welcome back, everyone. I hope you've had some interesting conversations in your breakout rooms. Apologies about the Jamboard sharing option. But I hope you managed to get down some of your insights because we will be talking about them later. So next, I'll be sharing a case study just to ground some of these sort of theories in practice. Okay, I've entitled this case study, Learning by Doing, as I was not a trained evaluator before consulting on this project. I drew most of my practice from monitoring, or how we like to call it now, measurement, evaluation, and learning. I particularly drew philosophies from developmental evaluation and followed a value system aligned with my master's research, a relational approach. I am emphasizing this because I really do believe who you are as an evaluator or an actor in the evaluation ecosystem matters. As an evaluator, I bring a certain set of beliefs and worldviews that guide my practice. The project I'm about to present to you was made up of a particular set of people who individually were open to learning and passionate about creating impactful outcomes. I'll be quite general about the specifics of the project, but rather talk to the enabling factors and the process. So what was really important for the approach that we took to evaluation was that the project had committed shared values. And these shared values of any project or organization are really, really important for evaluation, because evaluation is not an external process, but something that is critically embedded within a project. It is your guide to learning about change. So just to highlight their shared values, the first one was to be inclusive of all people, especially those that are marginalized and vulnerable. They were committed to co-creating solutions and knowledge to foster agency towards the system's approach. For them, this meant meaningful relationships, a relational approach. They deeply recognized and respected cultural and environmental contexts. This puts value on the unique people, resources, and ecosystems that the project was embedded in. They were committed to seeking meaningful collaboration with partners in civil society, business, tertiary education, and government. They worked with processes that were guided by their vision and set of shared values. This involved facilitating a process for change rather than focusing on predefined outputs. Process orientation for them also meant that all involved actors had ownership over the process. And then lastly, they seeked opportunities for change rather than focusing solely on problems within a system in order to enhance capacities and be inclusive of the local context. Another key enabling factor for this evaluation approach was that there was a pre-existing governance structure. The project was made up of a funder, a trust, and then followed by a partnership steering committee. These partners were truly committed to working together and all actively involved in decision-making. There were no silent partners. Furthermore, there were clear lines of communication between the project coordinator and partners. Employees of the project were brought in to co-create, and participants, beneficiaries, sponsors, and customers were actively involved in the learning elements of the program. Before we began planning the evaluation, it was really important for me to understand the purpose of the evaluation so that we were all on the same page on who the evaluation was for and why it was integral to the project. We came up with this diagram where at the heart, that evaluation was to internally inform learning processes and guide decision-making towards their goals. Secondly, with equal importance, on the periphery, the purpose was to provide credible data and learnings to their funders, sponsors, collaborators, and supporters. Lastly, a key aspect of the project is advocacy. Therefore, the evaluation needed to contribute towards knowledge sharing around their concept model and its practical application of two theories to contribute towards transformative change. Again, different types of evaluation and approaches may be more fitting to a specific project. This is why I'm highlighting the shared values, the governance model, and the evaluation purpose. What is really important is whether we are asking the right questions and collaborating with the right people to enable a transformative approach. Okay, let's get into my process. I've selected these two photos because firstly, it was really collaborative, and collaboration takes time and requires an acknowledgement of this time. Further, it was messy. There were often delays, working package deadline extensions, and changing priorities. This is the nature of working with people, particularly in environments where M&E is an extra on their already full plates. I'll take you through key elements that were the foundations to this process. They were capacity building, shared responsibility, and facilitation and enabling. In the beginning, I spent quite a lot of time ensuring that all partners and project employees agreed and understood what M&E was and an MEL approach would mean. I drew from key frameworks that are already being used in South Africa to create legitimacy of the approach. I focused a lot on the why, showing how MEL was relevant to the project. And lastly, I emphasized how this approach aligns strongly with the culture and values of the project. For me, this was about creating understanding and buy-in to the process. So once the minimum outcomes were agreed upon, and just to give a little explanation of minimum outcomes, because there's lots of terminology in M&E, as we know, but we viewed them as the guides to what you imagine success would look like. The next step was looking at who was closest to this outcome. So who did it make the most sense to be measuring, evaluating, and learning from this outcome? For example, responsibilities were given to employees, the partners, the project coordinator, and the participants. Sometimes it made sense for self-evaluation of performance, because that was an empowering process to which individuals could reflect on their successes and failures and provide learnings into their next quarter of work. Once the MEL plan was set up for the year with those responsible, I spent time with each person and figured out what systems and processes would make the collection of data easy and most efficient. For example, there were daily paper measurements for a certain indicator, but what we needed was a monthly and quarterly average to report on. The person that was responsible for this had not graduated from high school and just completed a computer skills course. So we leveraged that, and I created a simple Excel for them, as well as a video explaining the average function, something that they could always come back to. Once these three elements were complete, I had to let go and trust the process. I was actively involved in preparing the first quarterly report, but then after that, I had to let go of control and let the process run its course. At the end of last year, I began preparing the impact and learning report for the year. This involved collating the quarterly measurement, evaluations, and learnings, and quite linearly reporting on what was achieved. This was a process of also collecting missed data and acknowledging that some of the minimum outcomes agreed on were not measured throughout the year, and also being okay with that because capacity clearly didn't allow. While writing this report, it really solidified the importance of this evaluation approach, from reframing measuring impact from simple outputs to a range of outcomes and learnings, which are all of equal value. An example included some research and development work that focused on understanding a specific training landscape in South Africa. From this, a key strategy emerged, finding a clear need or opportunity, which led to the project refocusing this year. But this activity was not linked to a prescriptive minimum outcome of the farm, and that was evaluated and drawn from to showcase impact. However, this learning outcome that emerged from re-strategizing throughout the year has a huge long-term impact for the feasibility of the program. So what was great was that the partners and the trust and all the stakeholders at the end of the year, and since the report has been published internally, we're really happy with the process. And this year, we are iterating and helping to improve some of the processes and also look at the weak points and see how we can make them easier. This is kind of involving a lot of Google Forms and easy feedback points that can also be accessible on WhatsApp. So to close, I hope that I've provided some inspiration to how M&E can be an empowering process for all actors in the evaluation ecosystem. How when we all have a stake in learning about the change and the way we measure, we can bring stakeholders together, celebrate the wins, learn from our mistakes, and actively adapt towards visions and impact.
Thanks so much, Ames, for sharing. Yeah, I mean, having been alongside you through this process, I saw how much effort and time that you put into it on the ground. And I think we as emerging evaluators are learning, as Amy said, by doing. And yeah, it's been a process for both of us as we start to work with new clients and like develop our own goals and our own values and what are we bringing into the space. So I hope you picked up on some of that from Amy's process. Just so I had a quick look at the Jamboard, and I think the main message that's coming through for me is that we really do need something new. And to do this, we're going to need creativity and experimentation. And even more so, I think we need buy-in from everyone in the evaluation ecosystem, which I think links back to what we're trying to, the conversation that we're trying to start here is, who are we in that system and what can we do to enable it? What do we need from the system? What's constraining us? And just to share sort of one of the findings from my master's was I created almost the spectrum of different type of donors that I had experienced, from one side being the mercenary corporate donor who is very conservative, wants quantitative data, has a very set mindset, to the thinking partner. And I had an experience of working with a thinking partner, and they were all about what do the people on the ground think is important to measure, and oh, okay, that didn't work, I'm not going to pull the funding. Like that's an interesting learning. What can we learn from that? So I kind of, I have it in my mind as this scale, and I think all donors are somewhere on that scale. And I think what we need from the donor community is a bit more of that thinking partner side of it. But obviously, it just takes a lot of dialogue and engagement. So I think that's something that I can see coming through, and that's why we have these amazing spaces like Global. And just looking at our time, we do have a bit of time. So if anyone would like to share a reflection from the session, you can just raise your hand. And we've got a reflection here from Karen saying, almost all of it resonates with some of my experience with Merle, or a resilience building program run by an NGO, where we also experimented a lot and given the space to do so, which I think is important. If anybody else would like to share a reflection, you have the floor.
Or if you'd like to ask a question.
Go ahead, Guy.
Thanks. I wonder if you could just reflect on some of those Made in Africa evaluation guiding principles, and those practical sort of examples of how you would sort of develop a practice that incorporates African values, for example, in like an evaluation perspective.
Sure. So going into my master's, I think this is what I really was trying to do, is understand how we actually do these principles in practice. I think the best example that I can give was, so I spoke earlier about the notion of relationality and how I experienced that the participants experienced success in relation to their family or their community environment. And so when I asked them, what does success mean to you? It was providing school uniforms for my kids, or the fact this program is a success to me because I see less litter in the community. So those were all kind of reflections that they had. So I built this model where instead of measuring success on an individual level and saying like this individual has got this much profit extra, or has received this training course, I had a model where it was the individual at the middle and then family, community, and environment. And I kind of created like a bit of a complexity diagram where we looked at what the program was doing on all the levels. And I think that's also just an important mindset shift for us to think about, because when you're putting money into one person, and I don't know if it's like this all around the world, but especially in South African rural context, you're actually supporting so many more people through that money because of the way that money moves. And so it was cool to, just create literally just a diagram with the center and then going out with all the layers and seeing how the program was impacting on all the layers. So that's an example how relationality can be used in the framework for evaluation. But of course, I think there's a lot of principles, and part of, one of the principles being documentation is we need to try this more, and then we need to record what is working, what's not working, so that we can learn from each other, because it seems a bit abstract always, these frameworks, before you put them in practice.
Yeah, and also to add, I think, the main point of why we were getting to the individual and reflecting on your role as an actor, for whatever you may feel is a transformative approach, is kind of the point. And yes, it's great to have principles, frameworks, guiding points, but at the end of the day, every context is so different, and different participants, different donors, it's going to look very different depending on the complexity, the problem that you are tackling. So it really is, what is your value system and how do you do that in your work? That should be what's driving evaluation, no matter what the tick box exercise or the framework that you're using.
Cool. Jasmine, there's a hand up.
Hi, yes, thank you so much for the presentation. It really was amazing to get a chance to learn more about monitoring and evaluation in our African context, especially after Africa Day last month. I just wanted to ask, as somebody who's stepping into this space after recognizing the importance of monitoring and evaluation in the nonprofit sector, what advice would you give to others in the room who are starting journey in terms of capacitating yourselves? It's not always about starting a course necessarily, but I know that can always help. But what would your advice be, and what is the kind of, would you say, the example of the skills you need as a monitoring and evaluation person in this space?
Yes, I think what I touched on my slides is the soft skills, facilitation, deep listening. So it's a little bit of like the, hard and soft skills, because when I'm having to do an actual evaluation, it becomes quite technical and looking at carbon measurements and these kind of things. So it's a little bit of like rational brain needed, and then also more of the soft skills, which can only really, you can't, do a course to coach you on these. It has to happen in practice. But yeah, just like reading up on philosophies of evaluation, like developmental evaluation is, it's about experimentation and not going in with too many predefined expectations. So that kind of, it's a philosophical approach. It's not a framework. Could help you to build your own practice. I don't know if there's something you want to add, Ames.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things that I've come across as well is there's a lot of conversation now about what are the evaluation training programs, from which what mindset and worldview are they coming from? So sure, you can go and do a lot of courses, but Amy and I have struggled with this when we look at the course outlines. We're like, this seems really conventional and not that interesting. And, we'd actually rather develop our skills in another way. So I don't know if you're maybe having the same experience, and I think it's a call to the institutions and the researchers and students in the room. And there is papers being written. I read one by Sarah Chapman recently, where they're talking about innovating over how we actually teaching evaluation. So I think there is a bit of a responsibility from the institutional side to shake it up a bit and focus more on these other competencies that we need as evaluators.
Ames, I just see
Thank
Mark
you.
asked a question. How do your principles compare or link in with existing African evaluation principles as generated by the African Evaluation Association?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that part of my process was trying to see what was written about the most. So with the intention there being that the people who are thinking and engaging with the concept, what are they writing about more? Because that is what the concept then means to them. So while some of them did relate, about being technically robust or being rooted in Africa, those are both AFRIA principles. There was some such as the evaluation is ethically sound, and the conversation of ethics doesn't come up a lot within the sort of what's being written about it. So I felt like there were some principles from AFRIA that were being strongly connected to, and others that people maybe, I don't know if they didn't feel they were as important, or maybe that left to say they're not in that space so they can't comment on it. But what I felt is these principles that are up on the screen here were the ones that people are talking about the most. And I think that is always a good starting point for moving forward with the framework.
Yeah, and I also think
okay.
no, just not getting too focused on the technicalities of words and being based in the practice. Like, I'm based in New Zealand now, and can I not practice Made in Africa evaluation? There's amazing frameworks in New Zealand, Kaupapa Māori evaluation, very similar relationality. We also need to be drawing in from the ethical principles that are also existing in all areas of the world.
All right, Danny, do you want to go? Or Kara?
I think it's me who has. So I don't really want to frame that as a binary, but I think we spoke about it in terms of, having what Amy B just said, having, almost soft skills on one side and the technicalities on the other side. And I think I would almost think about these terms in terms of having contextuality as opposed to comparability. And that's often what is required in a way in the international space. So I'm just interested in your thoughts on that, because that's something I'm grappling with a lot in my job, like how to make a point for contextuality and how to reconcile those two, and your experiences with that.
Is that a question for me or you, Ames? This is when it gets confusing having the same name.
I think both of you spoke about that.
So yeah, I didn't quite get the question. What was the question?
I'll answer just about how do you make an argument for contextuality, basically. I think in my experience, I think the argument is that we have been funneling and channeling money into Africa for so long, and we still have a lot of the same developmental kind of issues. So something is not working, and an organization or someone who's spending a lot of money should want things to be working. So I think it's also just about reflecting on, well, we've gotten this far and a lot of the time it's not working, so maybe we should try something new. I don't know if that would make them have buy-in, but that would be a starting point. Ems, I don't know if you have anything to add.
I'm not quite sure if I'm answering the question, but in terms of the argument for contextuality, I guess for me, contextuality is very focused on the people the ecosystems that are working within that particular context. So what emerges when you start to build relationships and learn and experiment is something new that you wouldn't know. So, and every context is different, even if you look at something like Cape Town, for example. So that can only, the argument of contextuality is that it emerges from the context when you are practicing. And yes, it's good to have guides and frameworks, but having like an open space for things to emerge, for me, is what is really important.
I'll also just jump in and say, if anyone is like really interested in, you know, African philanthropy from an African perspective, it is being studied for the first time at Wits Business School and with CAPSI, and the course content is it's very new and very relevant, and all the lecturers are academics in the field, and yeah, I can share a few things with you guys after this, but worth taking a look at some of the short courses that they offer. Or the longer ones too.
Cool, thanks, Danny. Kari, you had your hand up for a while, and then we'll go on to Uziwake.
Thank you very much, Emmy. My question is just a very short, a simple one. So as I'm looking at this Made in Africa guiding principles, what came to my mind is that if we can now change the Made in Africa evaluation and say Made in Europe evaluation, are these principles still going to apply that side? Thank you.
I think I would say yes. I think the idea of, I mean, let's look together. So for evaluation to be contextually and culturally responsive, I think that's important wherever you are in the world. You know, participation, co-creation, building capacity. I do think that, yeah, I do think that it would still apply, but I guess the point is they've already got their own established set of frameworks and principles that are very entrenched, but maybe they also need relooking at, who knows? I don't have much sort of experience in that context. Thank you for the question though.
Yeah, I think
Okay,
again, you know, Made in Africa evaluation is something unique because it's something that has been built from the context. So that in itself is a huge, powerful thing that, you know, theories and concepts are often put onto Africa. So that's what, for me, what it's really about. And then finding linkages, talking to different people and the global South. I think it's really important to not, you know, be too, because Africa in itself is so dynamic and country varied. So yeah, just to keep in that mind of like contextuality is really about the people, the ecosystems, and the place that you're working in.
Definitely. All right, sorry, Karen, now to your question. And this can be our closing question and reflection.
Not so much a question, perhaps, but just looking at these principles, this is something that I've also grappled with a lot. You know, what do principles like this actually mean for how we practice our evaluation and what we do? And I think, you know, the conclusion I've come to is that it is wonderful to have them sort of, to think about them up front, but the process of working out what they mean in your particular project or your particular context is actually not an easy one. So it's not just a case of, you know, kind of following a set of rules of how you do things. It's more about having to reflect all the time on what is emerging and how you think what's happening in that context fits or doesn't fit with the principles. So we found actually in one project I was working on that what we ended up doing was in all our quarterly reports, we had we kind of put a long table in there of all the principles for the project. There were 7 of them, I think, and then trying to reflect on what had happened in the project over that quarter that spoke to that particular principle. So it was just like a summary to look back and say, okay, did we encourage participation if that was one of our principles? And did we co-create things in a collaborative way, and try to look at the actual things that had happened, what had worked, what had not worked, and just try and relate it to the principle. So maybe just to suggest that as a quite a useful process, and it's something that I don't know, I think we don't often do, is have the time and the space, or make the time and space to do that kind of deep reflection. And then just quickly also to mention that I and some other colleagues, one of who is also in this meeting, are busy writing a paper where we're trying to do exactly that, sort of reflect on our practices and whether how they address principles, especially of equity. It hasn't been an easy process to actually think about what we do and how it addresses equity. So we're very much keen to continue a conversation with as many people as possible, and try and think about these things. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Thanks so much for that reflection. Yeah, I think there's many of us on the call who would be like to reconnect around that. You hit the nail on the head. So yeah, I think that kind of brings us to the end of our session. Ames, I don't know if you have any closing remarks.
No, I think just again, a learning approach, reflection and learning.
Yeah, experimentation.
Karen, yeah, said really well.
And you should read her paper. It's great. It speaks a lot about the other competencies that we need as evaluators.
And I hope that through the case study, the sort of iterative learning aspect came through. So that's really what it was about.
Cool. We will be sending a sort of post-workshop reflection report. We can share this link and the slides as well. And we'll also make sure you have our email addresses and sort of LinkedIn. We're LinkedIn at No Better Exchange. And we are, excited to continue this conversation. As emerging evaluators, we are constantly learning as well. So yeah, thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you.
We call ourselves twice as Amy, Jen.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks a lot. That's great.
Thank you.
Thanks so much,
Bye.
Amy. Thanks. Well done.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.